Welcome to the GreenPilled.network podcast. If you're just joining us, we are building a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive some digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it. It is published every Tuesday and Thursday. If you want to learn more, you can visit our website at GreenPilled.network, where you can download the GreenPilled book for free, join the Discord, or become a member of your local GreenPilled.network chapter. My guest today is Max Howell, who is the CEO at Tea.xyz and is formerly the creator of Brew, which is a famous open source package manager from the Web 2 boom. Max has been an OSS dev since 2004, has been working on open source software for almost 2 decades now, and it was those insights that led him to create Brew, which is one of the most famous package managers in the open source software development ecosystem. You can Brew install many packages on your Mac in order to set up your dev environment. And Brew was once the top package on GitHub, which I think is just a monumental feat of contributions to open source software for Max. Max has created a lot of great software in the world, and unfortunately, his open source software contributions have not been well compensated. Max has had to work corporate jobs and contribute to open source software on the side. And I think that that's a fundamental injustice to the world, that open source software developers, the people who are creating our digital infrastructure, which creates billions of dollars of economic value per year, are not compensated for the work that they do. And those of you who have been following my career since before I started GreenPill know that I founded Gitcoin, which had the original mission of growing open source software and funding the open source software developers. Gitcoin has since moved on to focusing on all different sorts of public goods, funding what matters in your DAO ecosystem, and has broadened its aperture to beyond open source software. But there are projects like Max's Tea.xyz that are focused on making sure that open source software developers are well funded. So Tea is a package manager, kind of the successor to Brew. You can see what Max is doing with the memetics there, going from Brew to Tea as his project names. But Tea is a project manager that allows you to install packages across many of the popular ecosystems out there, pip, npm, the Rust ecosystem, and more. And then from there, it creates a dependency tree of all of the different packages in the open source ecosystem and builds a web of trust style data structure so that it can map out which projects depend on which pieces of infrastructure in the open source ecosystem. And then it builds an economic infrastructure on top of that logical infrastructure that allows people to support their favorite open source projects, either with donations or with staking tokens. And so I'm really excited about what can be done with the knowledge graph that is the open source software dependency tree. Web of Trust is what powers Google. It's what powers PageRank. And it's just a really, really powerful methodology for making sure that we understand which packages are creating the most important impact on the world. And there are things deep down there in the stack that we all just take for granted. OpenSSL or Node.js, things that everyone uses that there isn't good economic incentives to maintain. And that's the problem that Max is trying to solve with Tea. So I think in a world in which Max is maximally successful, open source software developers could quit their job and they could get rewards from Tea or Protocol Guild or Gitcoin or any of the other open source software or public goods funding infrastructure out there. And you could quit your corporate job and work on open source software. And that's just, wow, that would be such a beautiful world if the billions of dollars of value that was being created by open source software developers, if the universe karmically boomeranged back to these open source developers and helped them pay their bills for working on open source software. So this is a special episode for me because, like I said, Gitcoin, when I first started it, we were really focused on open source software. And there are other people who are picking up the mantle of really focusing on open source and finding ways to pay the software developers. And I think that that is a moral right in its own right, but it's also going to be a really convenient way for Web3 to go mainstream. Web2 software developers are very influential and they built our digital infrastructure, and we should be funding the open source software developers. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode with Max Howell, the CEO of Tea.xyz. Enjoy.
ValleyDAO is an open global collective working to finance and democratize the governance of synthetic biology technologies to protect the future of our planet. Research and progress into synthetic biology is critically constrained by the world of nation-state regulations and bureaucracy from middlemen. But the potential that synthetic biology has for the world is massive. It can produce a world in total harmony with nature. We can grow stuff using cells like software. It's awesome. And the best part is we no longer have to pull carbon out of the ground to grow and maintain civilization. Don't you think we should be funding this? ValleyDAO does, and that's what they're here to do, to try and make the SolarPunk world of tomorrow a reality today. So join ValleyDAO right now and save the planet at valleydao.bio.
What's up, Max? How you doing?
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
Really glad to have you. Tell me about tea.
Well, tea came from personal needs. I got into the whole programming malarkey through open source. It was what inspired me to actually get into the industry and be a programmer. Before that, I'd tried to be a scientist and discovered it was uninspiring, I think, was the surprising thing about it. And so I searched among my other minor hobbies to find something, and I found programming, but that wasn't enough. It was the open source component that really dragged me in. I remember when I got involved in it in 2004, I discovered all these little niche programming communities that were really just trying to make a difference in the world. That was what inspired me the most. They were like, we don't want a world where companies like Microsoft are making all the technological decisions about how things work. We believe in free software. We believe in the power of Linux with its ever so important GNU part, as the GNU people will always tell you, but it is an important part. And I found groups of people that I started making software with, and it was just great. And then I discovered that that's not enough in this life. You need to somehow pay your rent and pay for bills, and money is important, and there is no money in open source. It certainly wasn't in 2004. So I got myself into the industry, and I created Homebrew while I was working at a startup in London. And that was like a turning point for me in the respect that I quit my job. And before that, I'd been working on open source part-time, or was living with my parents for a bit after university. But then I wanted to work on open source full-time, but there was no way to do it. I had a bit of money saved up, and I worked about 6 or 7 months before I ran out. I remember going to the bank and asking them what happens when you go overdrawn, because I was just such a noob when it came to money in general. And they were like, well, you owe us a bit of money. I was like, okay, great. I better get a job again. And my whole career was working for people, contract startups. I didn't really like big corporate stuff. And then also doing open source at the same time, a lot of the time. I say I had 2 full-time jobs, because especially with Homebrew for those first few years, I couldn't sleep because it was so constant, the amount of attention, the amount of contributions it was getting. And I just felt this incredible obligation to make sure that Homebrew was as good as it possibly could be. I think a lot of the people that get into open source feel that. Yeah, well, also, over the years, I've been trying to figure out how open source can be funded, how people like me can work on it full time. And tea is what I hope will be the final solution to that. Taking my depth of experience with how open source works and the kind of people that work in it and what motivates them, and applying that at the blockchain layer in order to try and make a unique value distribution system. And yeah, well, I think honestly, over the last year or so that we've been working on it, we've figured out a correct solution that has a good chance of working.
Well, great to hear about your journey. And I just got to say that I'm a huge fan of Homebrew. For the audience, Homebrew is a tool that you can use on your Mac to brew, install different software packages on OS X. So you can brew install Node, brew install a bunch of different packages, and it's something that I've used. It's helped accelerate my trajectory in open source software. And I really resonate with you and your story about how you had 2 full-time jobs, but you're only being paid for one of them. There's this same famous trope in open source software that all of the tools that we use that are part of our digital infrastructure are maintained by people who are just doing it on a hobbyist basis. And they're not getting compensated for it the way they would with physical infrastructure. I think the stat was something in the billions of dollars a year of economic values created by open source, but there's no one that's actually funding that stuff. So it feels like we're connected on those 2 levels, the homebrew, me being a user, you being the author of it, but also just noticing that open source software developers, despite creating a lot of economic value, have not really been able to pay their mortgage by writing their software. And it seems like Tea is kind of designed to correct that asymmetry and build off of what you learned with homebrew. Is that right?
Like, I'd say it's more than billions. Like, the truth is there's almost no software nowadays that exists without some open source part. And you got to like attribute like a portion of the value of the entire software industry to the value of open source, which is crazy, honestly, to think about. Like, back when I got involved in it in the first place, like, we never imagined, we hoped, we dreamed. There was a lot of idealism in that early part, but then along the way we got dragged into like a burgeoning industry. And I ascribed like that ascent to part of the reason it happened. It was like this gradual thing. And so a lot of people got caught up in that. And yet they maintain these like essential pieces of software, and there's no compensation, like practically nothing. There's more money in open source now, but that's because of commercial open source, which I think is a very sensible reaction to the necessity of open source, and also the fact that open source really does make the best things in the end. Not always. The user experience is sometimes like lacking, but the developer experience is usually on point. So you still need regular business for certain kinds of things, but those pieces of tooling and libraries and frameworks underneath everything, open source is the best way to make those. And yet, we've allowed the people making these things to go, into despair sometimes through the fact that they can't figure out how to continue to build this stuff, because they love the fact that they built it. Like I did. I was extremely proud of Homebrew. Like, I can't say it didn't affect my ego for a while. I was 20 something, and I had this like incredibly, like, it was the biggest project on GitHub for a long time. Like, first 5 or 6 years of its existence, eventually getting overtaken by something Facebook made, which that was Bootstrap. Twitter's Bootstrap. Overtook it. Really pissed me off. But it was due, Homebrew was just a package manager at the end of the day, but it was just a well-made one. Yeah, like you hear all the time about these people that just rage quit open source, and sometimes they're maintaining like really fundamental infrastructure. And so far, nothing really terrible has happened, but I feel that we really are at this like peak, this crux. It's like I say, like this ascent towards the point where so much software depended on people doing it out of the goodness of their own hearts has just built to like this pinnacle point, this cliff-hanging moment. We have to find a solution that isn't just companies like Google and Microsoft and Facebook hiring these people. For a long time, I just didn't see what the solution was. I hate sponsorship and I hate bounties and things because, well, sponsorship at least, because it turns open source into a charity. And I don't hate bounties, but I don't think it's aligned with like the long-term success of open source, because it encourages the people with the money to dictate where the project goes, rather than the community. And open source is all about the community. Like, it's built by that community, the people who get the value out of it, the people who understand what the problem is that they're trying to solve. And that agenda needs to remain with the community. And like, I love the fact that, with crypto, you get that aspect. The community governs the project via tokenization. So it just feels like what we're building with Tea has this natural fit, which sometimes it spooks me a bit. So I was meant to build this thing.
That's amazing. I mean, I feel in a lot of ways the same way about my work, and I know a lot of people who are using Web3 for impact feel that way also. And I think it's interesting what you said about Homebrew being the #1 package on GitHub, but you still aren't really monetizing it other than maybe it strokes your ego a little bit to have that. It probably gave you job offers, sponsorships, bounties, but those are really like taking the Web2 corporate business models and bolting them onto open source. And it seems like there was a journey where you're looking for like a more internet native way of financializing open source and rewarding software developers. And, that journey, I think, is one that I've seen a lot of open source software developers go on along the way. And they either end up just grinding, or they get burnt out and they drop out, or it feels like increasingly more and more of them are getting into crypto only begrudgingly. Crypto has its own problems, but I think that, it'll be interesting to see how you take these learnings and this sort of life's work of yours and package it all up into Tea, which it sounds like is a Web3 era package manager. It is. How would you describe Tea?
But I just wanted to say how I've seen a lot of open source people in Web3 that I didn't realize were in it in my journey, because I didn't really get into it before Tea. And one of the things I've realized is that the community that first got me into open source is actually basically the same community that's building Web3, and that makes me have a lot more confidence in what we're building, because those people built Web2, right? It wasn't the droves that came once Web2 was a huge success. It was those people back then that built the fundamental pieces. And
the plumbing, the packages are the ones, not the same ones you see on magazine covers. The people who are drudging and building the infrastructure are the real builders of Web2 in your mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's really encouraging to see that. I want these people to be able to build it outside of the agenda of the Web2 companies that own so much stuff. Just yesterday, I saw a company that I really like get bought by AWS, and it keeps happening, right? These commercial open source companies, they don't actually survive. Open source is forever, but companies are not. And yeah, we're building a system that slots onto the emergent system that open source is, right? Because nobody imagined what they were forming back when those guys originally designed Unix. They didn't realize that they were inspiring an entire ethos, a way of working, a way of building out in public for free.
Yeah,
exchanging ideas, and the capitalism doesn't bolt onto that. Is the truth, and that's why it's failed. That's why open source has not managed to find funding. Right? I remember when Homebrew got quite big, and then NPM had just gone quite big, and the guy who made NPM realized that he could probably get funding for it, and he did. Some VC just randomly found my number. God knows, I didn't ask. Not swear. They phoned me up and they were like, "Can we do the same with Homebrew?" And at the time, the very idea of open source being able to be a business was pretty new, and I didn't see how it could be done. But especially with Homebrew, it was too late. Turn it into a company. There was too many people involved, and I didn't want their contributions to be a slap in the face, and then turn around and say, "Hey, no, now I'm going to monetize it." I like that, that's going to have consequences to what Homebrew is and how it's built and where we're going. So with Tea, it was very important from the start that we just didn't change the fundamental nature of open source, but instead just recognize the huge value it has and then know where that value is. And so yeah, part of it is this idea that package managers like intrinsically understand all the relationships between all the different packages in open source. Like, package is a terrible name.
Yeah.
But that is what we have.
It's the front door maybe to the whole infrastructure that you're building is the package manager. But
yeah. So yeah, like all the different package managers are what we're using to build out this what's going to be an oracle on chain that ranks all the different projects based on how important they are. And we're using a form of Google's PageRank to do that. Because we realized that the dependency tree of the packages is like a reputational assignment. Like when a package is considered important and useful and mature, its dependencies, be they things in NPM or lower level stuff like OpenSSL, are considered choices by that person, that group of people that have that reputation. So we use that to build out this graph. And so we've got, I think, 30 million packages in this thing now, gradually putting all the package managers in, but we'll be launching our incentivized testnet later this year with, I think there's 6, including the big ones, NPM, PyPy, Cargo, just Rust is pretty cool. And people will be able to participate by committing a file to their repository, signed with their wallet that they'll have on chain. And this gives us the information we need to associate that project with that. We're hoping the wallet will be not a person, but, a DAO. And we'll be providing like suggestions for how to like instantiate that. But, it's a key part of what we're building, right? So I want how the token flows to be governed and not like going directly to anyone specifically. But, it's a whole other conversation.
I'm almost seeing like a square peg in a square hole where earlier in the conversation you were talking about basically rewarding open source software developers according to who's done the most important work in the ecosystem and rewarding the infrastructure, even if it's not the visible part of the software ecosystem. And then also you talking about how with a package manager, you already understand the semantic structure and relationships between all of the packages. And you're kind of building up this PageRank style web of trust between all of the packages by looking at their dependency trees. Those two things to me feel like a square hole and a square peg. And it's probably like that insight could probably only come from having run a package manager or being very familiar with the emergent structure that is open source software. So it makes me really excited about the approach that you're taking to solving the financing of open source software.
Yeah, we're glad to hear that. Like, it's difficult for me not to feel excited about it, but I'm looking forward to having more and more people, especially the open source community, excited about it. Like I say, I find that a lot of the real open source players are into Web3 already, so I think it's going to get a good onboarding effort when we do launch our ATN. But getting the rest on, like there's crypto skepticism for sure. Like when we announced this project last year, we went straight to the top of Hacker News, and then they closed the article because of the crypto connection. So we had this huge influx of interest and users, and then like suddenly dead, and barely managed to get back on the front page after that. It's strange that there is so much skepticism for a project which really does want to do good, but I do understand there's just been too many scams in the area in general.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, like I do feel that how we're doing it maps well, and it solves like one of the bigger problems that is these fundamental projects that nobody's heard of that need support the most. Like last year there was Log4j project, which was a piece of logging software for Java, and massive exploit. Loads of enterprise servers were immediately rootable. I think Minecraft could be rooted by typing something into the chat. And nobody had ever heard of the project. They didn't even realize they were using it, right? There's a certain depth of dependencies. And I think people don't mostly understand, well, you do when you check out your NPM modules directory, like just how much open source there is and how deep it goes and how you have no idea sometimes why one of these packages is there. And someone's maintaining that. And if you go to the NPM page, you can see just how many people are using it. Sometimes it's phenomenal numbers of people and users. And yeah, those ones down the bottom, like even when NPM added that thing where it was like, please donate, Core.js still didn't get enough. And the Core.js guy, what was it, 2 months ago, declared how he just couldn't do it anymore. I don't know what's happened with that story since, but that's why I say we're at this sort of crux, this peak. I really think we're at a cliffhanger moment for it. And so the timing for Tea is hopefully just right.
What this evokes for me, thinking about this open source infrastructure and just how vast it is thinking about the underside of a city where there's a bunch of electrical wiring, there's a bunch of structural support, there's sewers, there's probably a bunch of different infrastructure that I'm not even aware of. And I think you would just like take it for granted unless you actually went down and could see the plumbing beneath all of this stuff. But imagine you had a whole city, billions of dollars of economics that was just maintained, its underside, its infrastructure was just maintained by volunteers. I think that sort of paints a good picture of our digital infrastructure and how it's maintained these days.
Yeah, exactly. Well, obviously the people who maintain it generally are having a good time still, or they wouldn't. But, well, I maintain this library called Promise Kit, which I built 2014 or so. It's just promises for iOS, but at its peak it was used by 100,000 apps. Don't know what the number is nowadays. Like Apple made a first-class support for asynchronicity in the language, so probably less, but well, still get, every time there's a new version of Xcode, I get a bunch of people like coming on and say, hey, it doesn't work, you've got to fix it. And, we can talk about the entitlement that people use open source all day if you want, but I'm not going to go into it. It's not something that, I feel it, because I feel that entitlement sometimes myself, the stuff I use, so I don't have so much of an issue with it as some people do. And, I go in and I fix it. And where do I do that? I don't even use it anymore, right? I used to be... I used to do a lot of iPhone development. Now I haven't done it in 4 or 5 years, so I don't use this library anymore. So I go in and I fix it. Sometimes other people do, not usually. What am I getting? Nothing. And as peak, 100,000 apps. Some of them were apps like Netflix and Uber and McDonald's. And I never so much as got like a free Big Mac or a Netflix subscription or anything, Look, I kind of have sympathy for these companies because like they use tens of thousands of open source packages. So how can they realistically like donate or sponsor or do anything really? Like even if you had a department that their job was to try and hunt down these projects and the people, it's an incredibly manual process. Like stuff like GitHub sponsors has tried to fix that. Unsuccessfully, I can only say with my experience, because like I get, I think my current sponsorship rate is $8 a month from GitHub sponsors. I don't need the money right now or anything, but like if at any point that had turned into enough to pay, like say, I don't know, half my rent, I would have taken it more seriously than try to increase that. Like I'm not someone who chases the dollar. I like money. Who doesn't? But I can't work just for money. I have to care about what I'm doing, or I just like tune out and stop. That's by far the most important thing, is that I'm passionate about what I'm doing. So I'd much rather be working on open source. Well, prior to Tea, I feel what I've started here at Tea is like ideal. I came up with the idea one evening while hunting for things and managed to get the funding fairly easily, and we've been building since. Like I'm lucky and I value it. Yeah, so these big companies, like I sympathize. So I feel that that's another thing that Tea brings to the table. Automation for that aspect of things. And we're going to actively pursue the idea that corporations can like donate in a charitable sense to the graph. and they get that tax break that they also want, while simultaneously directly assigning the value to the packages that they actually use. And like what tooling we're building, part of what it can do is automate that on a company-wide scale, right? And you can install Tea, and it will tell you what packages you're using across all the different stacks. So that piece is also easy to do. Although considering how the chain's going to work, like you steep against packages and all their dependencies, automatically get pieces of that reward. Like we split it off, so the we call it steeping because it's not quite staking, right? Because we're not using a proof.
It's a clever branded name there.
Yeah, I wish I'd come up with it myself. That was my chief protocol officer who came up with that one because I like names. So you steep against any of the packages, right? There'd probably be an incentive to find packages that aren't that well steeped. There'll be a play on the T rank. So if you find one that isn't well known but still has good T rank, then you'll get a higher reward. So you get a reward, and then the package gets a reward, and then that reward keeps splitting all the way down the tree of the graph of open source. So even the core JSs of the world will get funding. And what's cool about that is like packages like core.js should get a lot based on our calculations. And I don't think that's wrong, per se. Like, I'll be interested to see how the community reacts to that. Because core.js is important, but it's not sexy, which is why there's only one. And stuff like open source SSL is important, but also not sexy, very difficult to do right, very scary to do right. And so we've kind of ended up with not many competitors in the space, even though open source is usually a place where competition happens naturally because people are trying to solve their problems. And if they don't find one of these things solves their problems, they just build their own, put it out there and see what happens. So I'm hoping like there will be this competitive element where people see that core.js gets a lot of token. So they'll build like an alternative that addresses problem points that core.js has. Or they can just show that they're maintaining it in a more active fashion and attract that steeping as a result. And like, I'm also excited about some of the other stuff that we might be able to do, probably not with version 1, but like version 2, where we allow the T-DAO to decide if security issues in your packages are severe enough to slash. That might actually go in V1. So I think it's a powerful reason for why the protocol is more than just a system for identifying value in open source, right? It's also about like holding these projects somewhat responsible. Like you're getting token out of this, so you kind of now do have to make sure there isn't any security holes in your open source. And considering how open source is just everywhere now, you know, it's surprising there isn't more examples that we know about of some of these exploits not being known about and being exploited on a large scale.
So it feels like you're kind of creating an economy around open source software that feels more internet native than sponsorships or bounties or job offers. And for me, it feels like there's kind of two major sides of the market. There's the developer which can go in and register their package by signing something using the T tool set. And then there's people who can come in and steep or drop rewards on any subset of software. And you maintain this sort of web of trust between all of the packages and lets it trickle down. And it's probably one of the first systems out there that's going to be able to really find the SSLs or the core JSs, the things that are not sexy, the things that are deep below the infrastructure, and make sure that the rewards trickle towards those really important projects. And I'm building up this mental map in my mind of this double-sided market and this really sophisticated graph, web of trust between all the packages in between them. Is my conception correct? I'm just trying to summarize it for the audience. And so I'd value it if I'm getting it wrong, if you could correct that.
No, that sounds right to me. You know, there's this huge, it's like there's an existing market, you know, which for some reason nobody managed to figure out how to appropriate value. And yeah, as I say, previously the current economic systems we have just don't map onto it. And so there's been tons of people who try to just apply like capitalism essentially to open source, and it just doesn't work. Or, make it a charity. It just doesn't work. And we all want something to work. So yeah, I like that our approach is using these new technologies and in the correct way.
One of the things that I'm just really excited about, it reaching the deep infrastructure projects that no one really appreciates because they're so deep in the stack. Gitcoin grants and Optimism RPGF, and there's a bunch of different things in the Ethereum ecosystem that are trying to fund public goods, but they all kind of, in my mind, suffer from this Keynesian beauty contest problem where it's sort of a beauty contest of which things are the most visible in a way, the decentralized reward mechanism, and no one has really cracked the deep infrastructure layer rewards. I mean, with the exception of like layer 1 blockchains, which have the block rewards for securing their networks. That's probably like an unseen job. But the people who are building those client software, no one has really figured out how to monetize at scale, maybe with the exception of Protocol Guild. So this really, for me, feels like if it works, it's going to fill a real niche. And I think it's going to be an important way of showing people in Web 2 open source and an influential group of people in Web 2 open source that crypto isn't all scams. There are scams in crypto, but just like there's bad websites on the internet, you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to those things. So that's the niche that I'm seeing Tea could fill if and when it launches and is successful.
Yeah, it should be, I'd say, a centralized test late this year, mainnet next year, early next year. But yeah, we really hope that we will be kind of bridge from Web 2 to Web 3 for people when they see what it can do. Like, we'll launch with a website you can go to that shows like how much token your project would be made if you signed up, if you onboarded to our protocol. And I can't help but think that that's going to just get a load of Web 2 type open source devs to, try out crypto for the first time. It's just too tantalizing, right? See what token you could be getting in that respect.
For the audience, say you're inspired by this vision, say you're a software developer, how can you get involved?
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of stuff on our GitHub already. Like, part of the pieces that I wanted to build for Tea was a successor to Brew, a second package manager. What it's evolved into is more like an MPX for just about everything, which is finishing up, like launching version 1 of that in a few weeks. So we've got a bunch of stuff there, including our white paper, which I made so that it's marked down, converted into PDF by Pandoc, because I just wanted everything to be iterative open source, so you can open up a pull request on our white paper and we automate the builds, translations and things. But the protocol pieces are not open source yet, but they will be over the next few months. So if you go check out our GitHub, Tea.xyz, Tea.xyz. And then that's also our Twitter. You can follow us there. We've got quite a good following now. We're just generally people who are passionate about open source and want to make it even more successful. I just kind of imagine, even like for myself, I can't imagine where I'd be in life if I'd been able to work on open source full time. Like, with part time, I managed to make a couple of like really significant open source projects. And we just want to make it so that that's a choice to everybody. Like, I really want it to be something where people who work at Facebook or Microsoft or whatever right now, like, can quit because they know that they can build this open source project and they're not worried about how they're going to like live on that. I think it's kind of a waste, honestly, like how many of these talented people are employed by these companies to do sometimes really like stuff that isn't for the benefit of mankind or the world in any way.
Yeah. Or leverages their highest skills.
Yeah, exactly.
So for the audience, just to recap, you can go to tea.xyz and you can get involved in the project from there. There's links to the GitHub, there's links to the Twitter, and there's links to your Linktree so that you can get involved with the project there. Last question for you, Max. In a world in which you're maximally successful, what does that look like?
I try not to dream, but if Tea protocol could really like help open source just reach the next level and make it so all these people who work in open source, like we get private DMs all the time for people who are quietly optimistic and they really want this to work. You know, if it could make open source into $1 trillion industry, then that would be, I'd die happy for sure.
Well, you know, what really resonated for me is when you were talking about people who worked in corporate America being able to quit their job and work on open source software. I think that's, you know, $1 trillion is a big number, but when you look at it on the systemic person by person level, I think that makes it a lot more relatable. And so I'm excited about that world. And I see a lot of sort of my optimism when I was building Gitcoin and you. That's probably just me projecting that on you. But Gitcoin, which is the project, one of the projects that I'm a co-founder of, the original mission was grow open source software. And we were focused on this problem back in 2017, 2019. It's since evolved into all sorts of different public goods and pro-social things. But I'm glad to see projects like y'all and Radical really still focusing on open source software. And I hope that you're successful.
Thank you. And well, yeah, thank you for Gitcoin. It really is still an amazing thing. But as I say, like, can't fix it all with bounties.
Yeah. Well, it's been quite a ride. I'm really excited to see a plurality of people who are working on sort of similar problems, but from different angles in the space. And, you know, we talked about open source being $1 trillion industry one day. I think that maybe there's a future in which if you're an open source software developer, you're getting a certain amount of income from Protocol Guild and a certain amount of income for Gitcoin and a certain amount of income from Tea and from Optimism, RPGF. And it's in that plurality of incomes. I think that there's a lot of anti-fragility that could come from that. But A, you're not dependent on any one economic system, but B, it's sort of interesting to have multiple streams of income if you're creating value on multiple layers. So it'll be interesting to see how these things all interoperate with each other. Hopefully Unix style, they interoperate really well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we must remember that. Like, there never is like one. And as you say, like, it's fragile for there to be one system. So there's a place for each of them.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap. Max, thanks so much for coming on the show. Good luck with Tea and looking forward to seeing the testnet launching hopefully later this year.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Peace. You just heard from Max Howell of Tea.xyz. I am really excited about funding open source software developers. I think it's a moral right for the world. I think it's going to help Web3 go more mainstream. Thank you for listening to the GreenPilled.network podcast. This podcast features the builders of a coordination. We are building a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive some digital systems to the world. I think Max Howell and Tea.xyz, as well as anyone else who is working to fund open source software developers, are great examples of that. If you value our work, please subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps other listeners help find the Green Pill movement and network. And I would really appreciate it if you could take a minute out of your day in order to subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode with others. Peace and love. See you next time.